can't
Let's
stand to
hear from
lose a
some
challenge
voices
against.
in Washington, D.C. and see what they've got to say about this. Pleased to say we're joined by Ari Fleischer and Joe Walsh as well. Ari, good to speak to you both, Joe and Ari. Ari, I'll start with you, just get a sense from you what you think the gravity of the situation is. You sat here listening to three Brits talking about it. Talk to us from the American point of view.
Yeah, I'm distressed. I mean, I just think about what people in other countries look at America, and they've always held America up with an ideal, and I cannot imagine what you think when you watch one leader of one party indict the leader of another party and potentially put him in prison, a former United States president. You know, I think these matters should be settled by the people. Donald Trump has done some objectionable things, but I don't think they're criminal. And if you don't like Donald Trump, vote him down.
Let's go
but to resort to the courts, to go to something that's never been done before, I just find extraordinary. And America is reaching a point where we have never gone before, and I find it very unsettling.
Let's speak to former Republican 2020 presidential candidate on some of those points, Joe, because they're points I know you've heard a lot the last few days as you've been doing the broadcast rounds. This idea of a weaponized justice system and the idea that there isn't any criminal activity being alleged here. What do you say to that?
Well, I agree with my friend Ari that the rest of the world must be scratching their heads, but they've been scratching their heads for a long time. 2.5 years ago, a sitting American president led an effort to violently overthrow an American election. Now, I disagree with my friend Ari in that I think this is a good day for America. This is a day to celebrate. No one is above the law, and that man who led a violent effort to overthrow an American election is finally being held accountable. That's a good thing.
Look, Ari, your friend Joe points this out. Can you agree with that? It's a good thing to at least have this air, to hear it sort of being interrogated or investigated. As Paula on our panel just said, 7 people did die in the action, the rioting that took place on January 6th.
What Joe just said was simple but wrong. If that was the case, then why wasn't Donald Trump charged with incitement to riot? The charge against him was not about the riot. The charge against him dealt with the statements that he made that were deceptive about what he actually believes, that he won the election, that the election was stolen, all of which led later to a riot. Look, I've always said that Joe Biden won the election, and I don't believe this election was stolen. I've never been in the camp of Donald Trump when it comes to that. But that is a separate matter from whether Donald Trump was one of the rioters, whether Donald Trump led the riot. If that was the case, he would have been charged with that. He wasn't charged with that. He's essentially being charged with a free speech violation, that his advocacy, the statements he made were knowingly false, is what the indictment says, and therefore they're charging him with that type of allegation. So you don't charge people with making statements like that. If you did, half the Democratic Party would have to go to prison because they charged that Donald Trump stole the 2016 election. And they've said about numerous other elections.
Joe, go ahead. Joe,
and
I just want to say to our viewers,
the noise. It should not be criminal.
You're watching pictures here of the motorcade and the press team all heading towards the courthouse there in Washington, D.C. We're going to be staying with these live pictures. Joe, go on.
Well, again, I agree with Ari. Trump's not being indicted for inciting a violent attempt to overthrow an election, but Ari's wrong. Trump is not being indicted based on anything he said. He's being indicted for what he did, crimes he committed. The allegations are, and he'll have his day in court, that he lied. He purposely lied in court filings. If true, that's a crime. He pressured state legislators to exceed their constitutional authority. If true, that's a crime. He led a conspiracy to create fake electors that were sent to the United States Senate. If true, that's a crime. And Donald Trump, it is alleged, pressured Justice Department officials to conduct sham investigations and lie to the American people. If true, that's a crime. This isn't about what Trump said. This is about what he did.
Ari, let's respond to that then, because it's not only what Trump said, what he did. This strikes at the heart of the US First Amendment as well. That is the right. You can have a false opinion. You can have false ideas. But the argument that is now being waged is what that then incites people to do, the actions that then follow. And surely it's had an effect on the way people think, because some new polling out by CNN this evening saying that nearly 70% of Republicans and Republican-leaning people believe that Biden did not win the last election.
Yeah, and this is where you have unequal justice, where justice that's supposed to be blind is not blind. I was there in 2000 after the 2000 election between Al Gore and George W. Bush that was settled by the Supreme Court. You had numerous Democrats challenge the results of that election, the Bush re-election in 2004. Numerous Democrats lied and said George Bush lost Ohio and challenged the results of that election as it came up in the Senate. So if believing ardently that someone has stolen an election and acting upon it is a crime, then half of Washington has to go to jail, both parties. And I say that as somebody who recognized that Joe Biden won. I think Donald Trump's wrong. But Donald Trump, if he ardently believes that the election was stolen, he's got a right to make that case and then to act upon that. And the systems of the American government held. Joe makes it sound like it's a crime to do the things Donald Trump did to pressure the Department of Justice. Well, that's also called advocating for something you believe if he believes it. And again, my point being, in America, the people are sovereign. The people solve these issues. And what we've already done in America is turn impeachment into the British-style vote of confidence. If you fail a vote of confidence, you leave as prime minister. Impeachment is different, but we've turned it into just that. And now we're turning the courts, the criminal justice system, into another way of resolving a political dispute. If you don't like Donald Trump, get rid of him.
Joe, can you buy that argument that this is essentially about protecting the US constitutional rights, and it is a political argument that's been brought into the courts of justice?
No, look, if we go by what Ari is hoping for here, if you're a candidate for president, then you're not to be held accountable for your crimes. Look, Ari can disagree with this indictment, but Jack Smith and the prosecutors have specific crimes that Donald Trump committed. And if they can prove their case in court, these are specific crimes. Trump has the right to prove that he didn't commit these crimes. But this baloney that Trump's being penalized because of what he said, that's just not true. We're talking about specific actions he took. Just one, Ari. You lead a conspiracy to create a slate of fake electors, and then you present those electors, those fake electors, to the United States Senate. If true, that is a crime, whether you like it or not.
Before we wrap up this conversation,
they were never presented to the.
Go ahead, Ari.
They were never presented to the United States Senate, and it is legitimate when the clock is ticking down, and if you do believe you want a state, and then you have a date certain by which your electors have to be in place, it's prudent to prepare for that. People call them fake electors, but it's also, if you think you won the state, you have your electors. This is a political dispute, not a criminal one.
Look, before we wrap up,
he'll have his day in court to make that case, Ari.
There's been plenty of days in court, both of you. Not for either of you, mine, but for Donald Trump, plenty. Look, let's talk about it. Joe Walsh, just before we wrap up, because you were a former Republican runner for presidency, you've been outspoken since about the fact that, kind of going against the Trump style of leadership has led you to a path where you're basically not accepting the mainstream GOP, that's the Republican Party. What is it to be a traditional Republican now in the US?
Well, and I fully acknowledge this is Donald Trump's party, and someone who opposes Trump has no room in the party. I fully acknowledge that, and I don't think that's going to change. And maybe Ari disagrees with me on this, but all these indictments are going to do is strengthen him. I think this indictment will lock up the nomination for him. And I think Donald Trump's going to be really difficult to beat in the general election.
Ari, the nomination locked up for this?
I think It's highly likely that's going to be Trump, but there is going to be an alternative who emerges, and I advise everybody, just wait. Late this fall, early this winter, there's always an alternative to the front runner. Someone will emerge. It'll either be Ambassador Nikki Haley, Senator Tim Scott. I think those are the two likely ones to rise. There are other possibilities. As far as Joe saying he's likely to be the next president, I don't know about that. I think where America is still a 50-50 country when it comes to the general election. I can see 82-year-old Joe Biden at the time winning the election. I could also see Donald Trump winning the election. Despite 3 indictments now, he's dead even in the polls with Joe Biden.
Fascinating stuff.